Hello, my friends. Long time no see. Well, as many of you know, I've been recovering from surgery and I am just about a day away from having the stent removed from my kidney. So I should be back in action, hopefully by Thursday, in about 2 days. But I'm finally feeling good enough that I feel like I can start a new book, so I thought I would do that today. So we're going to begin today with The Green Mummy, Chapter 1, The Lovers. I am very angry, pouted the maid. In heaven's name, why? Questioned the bachelor. You have, so to speak, bought me. Impossible. Your price is prohibitive. Indeed, when £1,000, you are worth 50 and 100 times as much, Pooh. That interjection doesn't answer my question. I don't think it is one which needs answering, said the young man lightly. There are more important things to talk about than pounds, shillings, and sordid pence. Oh, indeed, such as love on a day such as this is. Look at the sky, blue as your eyes, at the sunshine, golden as your hair. Warm as your affection, you should say. Affection, so cold a word when I love you. To the extent of £1,000, Lucy, you are a woman. That money did not buy your love, but the consent of your stepfather to our marriage. Had I not humored his whim, he would have insisted upon your marrying Random. Lucy pouted again, and in scorn. As if I ever would, said she. Well, I don't know. Random is a soldier and a baronet, handsome and agreeable, with a certain amount of talent. What objection can you find to such a match? One insuperable objection. He isn't you, Archie. Darling. The adjective appears to be an afterthought, grumbled the bachelor, when she merely laughed teasingly after the manner of women. He added moodily, No, by Jove, Random isn't me. By any manner of means, I am but a poor artist without fame or position, struggling on 300 a year for a grudging recognition. Quite enough for one, you greedy creature. And for two? He inquired softly. More than enough. Oh, nonsense, nonsense, nonsense. What, when I'm engaged to you, actions speak much louder than remarks. Mr. Archibald Hope, I love you more than I do love money. Angel, Angel, you said that I was a woman just now. What do you mean? This, and he kissed her willing lips, and kissed her strongly while they stood in the lane, which was empty save for blackbirds and beetles. Is any explanation a clear one? Not to an angel who requires adoration, but to a woman who... Let us walk on, Archie, or we shall be late for dinner. The young man smiled and frowned and sighed and laughed in the space of 30 seconds, something of a feat in the way of emotional gymnastics. The freakish feminine nature perplexed him as it had perplexed Adam, and he could not understand this rapid change from poetry to prose. How could it be otherwise, when he was but 25, and engaged for the first time? 60 years and 10 is all too short a time to learn what a woman really is. And every student leaves this world with the conviction that of the 1,000 sides which the female of man presents to the male of woman, not one reveals the being he desires to know. There is always a deep below a deep, a veil behind a veil, a sphere within a sphere. It's most remarkable, said the puzzled man in this instance. What is? Asked the enigma promptly. To avoid an argument which he could not sustain, Archie switched his on to the weather. This day in September, one could well believe that it is still the month of roses. What? With those wilted hedges and falling leaves and reaped fields and golden haystacks and she glanced around for further illustrations in the way of contradiction. I can see all those things, dear. And the misplaced day also. Misplaced? July day slipped into September. It comes into the landscape of this autumn month, as does love into the hearts of an elderly couple who feel too late the supreme passion. Lucy's eyes swept the prospect and the spring-like sunshine, revealing all too clearly the wrinkles of aging nature, assisted her comprehension. I understand, yet youth has its wisdom, and in old age its experience, the law of compensation, my dearest. But I don't see, he added reflectively, what your remark and my answer have to do with the view. Whereat Lucy declared that his wits wandered. Within the last 5 minutes they had emerged from a sunken lane where the hedges were white with dust and dry with heat, to the vast open space, apparently at the world's end. Here the saltings spread raggedly towards the stately stream of the Thames River, intersected by dikes and ditches, by earthen ramparts, crooked fences, sod walls, and irregular lines of stunted trees following the water courses. The marshes were shaggy with reeds and rushes, and brown with coarse, fading herbage, although here and there gleamed the emerald-hued patches of water-soaked soil, fit for fairy rings. Beyond a moderately high embankment of turf and timber, the lovers could see the broad river sweeping eastward to the Nore, with homeward bound and outward faring ships afloat on its golden tide. Across the gleaming waters from where they lipped their banks at the foot of low domestic Kentish hills stretched alluvial lands, sparsely timbered, and in the clear sunshine clusters of houses, great and small, factories with tall smoky chimneys, clumps of trees, and rigid railway lines could be discerned. The landscape was not beautiful, in spite of the sun's profuse gildings, but to the lovers it appeared a paradise. Cupid, lord of gods and men, had bestowed on them the usual rose-colored spectacles, which form an important part of his stock in trade, and they looked abroad on a fairy world. Was not she there? Was not he there? Could Romeo or Juliet desire more? From their feet ran the slim, straight causeway, which was King's Highway of the district, a trim, prim line of white above the picturesque disorder of the marshes. It skirted the low-lying fields at the foot of the uplands and slipped through an iron gate to the end of the far distance of a gigantic portal of the fort. This was a squat, ungainly pile of rugged gray stone, symmetrically built, but aggressively ugly in its regularity, since it insulted the graceful curves of nature everywhere discernible. It stood nakedly amidst the bare, bleak meadows, glittering with pools of still water, with not even the leaf of a creeper to soften the menacing walls, although above them appeared the full foliage tops of trees planted in the backyard. It looked as though the grim walls belted a secret orchard. What with the frowning battlements, the very windows, diminutive and closely barred, the sullen entrance, and the absence of any gracious greenery, Gartley Fort resembled the castle of Giant Despair. On the hither side, but invisible to the lovers, great cannons scowled on the river they protected, and, when they spoke, received answer from smaller guns across the stream. They were less extensive forts, were concealed amidst trees and masked by turf embankments, to watch and guard the golden argosies of London commerce. Lucy, always impressionable, shivered with her hand in that of Archie's, as she stared at the landscape, melancholy even in the brilliant sunshine. I should hate to live in Gartley Fort, said she abruptly. One might as well be in jail. If you marry Random, you will have to live there, or on a baggage wagon. He is RGA captain, remember, and has to go where the glory calls him, like a good soldier. Glory can call him until glory is hoarse for me, retorted the girl candidly. I prefer an artist's studio to a camp. Why? Asked Hope, laughing at her vehemence. The reason is obvious. I love the artist. And if you loved the soldier, I should mount the baggage wagon and make him Brovel when he was wounded. But for you, dear, I shall cook and sew and bank and bake and... Stop, stop. I want a wife, not a housekeeper. Every sensible man wants 2 in 1. But you should be a queen, darling, not with my own consent. Archie, the work is much too hard. Existence on £6 a week with you will be more amusing. We can take a cottage, you know, and live the simple life in Gartley Village until you become the PRA, and I can be Lady Hope to walk in silk attire. You shall be Queen of the Earth, darling, and walk alone. How dull! I would much rather walk with you. And that reminds me that dinner is waiting. Let us take up the short cut home through the village. On the way, you can tell me exactly how you bought me from my stepfather for £1,000. Archie Hope frowned at the incurable obstinacy of the sex. I didn't buy you, dearest. How many times do you wish me to deny a sale which never took place? I merely obtained your stepfather's consent to our marriage in the near future. As if he had anything to do with my marriage, being only my stepfather and having in my eyes no authority. In what way did you get his consent, his unnecessary consent? She repeated with emphasis. Of course, it was a waste of breath to argue with a woman who had made up her mind. The two began to walk towards the village along a causeway, and Hope cleared his throat to explain patiently to a child. You know what your stepfather, Professor Braddock, is crazy on the subject of mummies. Lucy nodded in her pretty, willful way. He is an Egyptologist. Quite so, but less famous and rich than he should be, considering his knowledge of dry-as-dust antiquities. Well then, to make a long story short, he told me that he greatly desired to examine into the difference between Egyptians and Peruvians with regard to the embalming of the dead. I always thought he was too fond of Egypt to bother about any other country, said Lucy sapiently. My dearest, it isn't the country he cares about, but the civilization of the past. The Incas embalmed their dead, as did the Egyptians, and in some way the professor heard of royal mummy, swathed in green bandages. A royal mummy, green bandages, or so he described it to me. It should be called an Irish mummy, said Lucy flippantly. Well, this mummy is in the possession of a man in Malta, and Professor Braddock, hearing that it was for sale for £1,000... Oh, interrupted the girl vivaciously. So this was why Father sent Sidney Bolton away 6 weeks ago. Yes, as you know, Bolton is your stepfather's assistant, and is as crazy as the professor on the subject of Egypt. I asked the professor if he would allow me to marry you. Quite unnecessary, interpolated Lucy briskly. Archie passed over the remark to avoid the argument. When I asked him, he said that he wished you to marry Random, who is rich. I pointed out that you loved me and not Random, and that Random was on a yachting cruise, while I was on the spot. He then said he could not wait for the return of Random, and would give me a chance. What did he mean by that? Well, it seems that he was in a hurry to get this green mummy from Malta, as he feared lest some other person should snap it up. This was 2 months ago. Remember, and Professor Braddock wanted the cash at once. Had Random been there, he could have supplied it. But as Random was away, he told me that if I handed over £1,000 to purchase the mummy, that he would permit our engagement now and our marriage in 6 months. I saw my chance and I took it. For your stepfather has always been an obstacle in our path, Lucy dear. In a week, Professor Braddock had the money, as I sold some of my investments to get it. He then sent Bolton to Malta in a tramp steamer for the sake of cheapness, and now expects him back with the green mummy. Has Sidney bought it? Yes, he got it for £900, the professor told me, and is bringing it back in the Diver. That's the same tramp steamer in which he went to Malta. So that's the whole story. And now you see there is no question of you being bought. The £1,000 went to get your father's consent. It actually wasn't for his consent. He's not my father, snapped Lucy, finding nothing else to say. You call him so. That is only from habit. I can't call him Mr. Braddock or Professor Braddock when I live with him, so father is the sole mode of address left to me. After all, she added, taking her lover's arm, I like Professor. I like him. He is a very kind and good man, although extremely absent-minded, and I am glad he has consented, for he worried me a lot. He probably wanted me to marry Sir Frank Random, and I am glad you bought me. But I didn't, cried the exasperated lover. I think you did, and you shouldn't have to diminish your income by buying what you could have had for nothing. Archie shrugged his shoulders. It was in vain to combat her fixed idea. I have still 300 a year left, and you were worth buying. You have no right to talk to me as though I had been bought. The young man gasped. But you said... Oh, what does it matter what I said? I am going to marry you on 300 a year, so there it is. I suppose when Bolton returns, my father will be glad to see you back, to see the back of me, and then we'll go to Egypt with Sidney to explore this secret tomb he is always talking about. That expedition will require more than £1,000, said Archie dryly. The professor explained the obstacles to me. However, his doings have nothing to do with us, darling. Let Professor Braddock fumble amongst the dead if he likes. We live. Apart, sighed Lucy. Only for the next 6 months. Then we can get our cottage and live on love, my dearest. Plus 300 a year, said the girl sensibly. Then, she added, oh, poor Frank Random. Lucy, cried her lover indignantly. Well, I was only pitying him. He's a nice man, and you can't expect him to be pleased at our marriage. Perhaps, said Hope, in an icy tone, you would call him to be the bridegroom. If so, there is still time. Silly boy, she took his arm. As I have been bought, you know I can't run away from my purchaser. You denied being bought just now. It seems to me, Lucy, that I am to marry a weathercock. That is only an impolite name for a woman, dear. You have no sense of humor, Frank, or you would have called me an April lady, because you change every 5 minutes. It's puzzling. It is, perhaps, you would like me to resemble Widow Anne, who is always in funeral. Here she is, looking like Niobe. There we're strolling through the Gartley village by this time, and the cottagers came to their doors and front gates to look at the handsome young couple. Everyone knew of the engagement and approved the same, although some hinted that Lucy Kendall would have been wiser to marry the soldier baronet. Amongst these was Winslow Ann, who really was Mrs. Bolton, the mother of Sidney, a dismal female invariably arrayed in rusty, stuffy, aggressive mourning, although her husband had been dead for over 25 years. Because of the same mourning, and because she was always talking of the dead, she was called Widow Anne, and she looked on the appellation as a compliment to her fidelity. At the present moment, She stood at the gate of her tiny garden, mopping her red eyes with a dingy handkerchief. "Ah, young love, my lady," she groaned when the couple passed. For she always gave Lucy a title as though she really and truly had become the wife of Sir Frank. But who knows how long it may last? As long as we do, retorted Lucy, annoyed by this prophetic speech. Widow Anne groaned with relish. "So me and Aaron, as is dead and gone, thought, my lady, but in 6 months he was knocking the head off of me." The man who would lay his hand on a woman, save in the way of— "Oh, Archie, what nonsense you talk!" cried Miss Kendall petulantly. "Ah," sighed the woman of experience, "I called it nonsense too, my lady. For Aaron, who now lies with the worms, laid me out with a flat iron. Men's fit for jails only, as I always says." "A nice opinion you have of our sex," remarked Archie dryly. "I have, sir. I could tell you things as would make your head raggle with horror on their shoulders of yours." "What about your son Sidney? Is he also wicked?" "He would be if he had the strength, which he hasn't," exclaimed the widow with uncomplimentary fervor. "He's Aaron's son, and Aaron hadn't much to learn from them, as is where he's gone to." And she looked downward significantly. "Sidney is a decent young fellow," said Lucy sharply. "How dare you miscall your own flesh and blood, Widow Anne? My father thinks a great deal of Sidney, else he would not have sent him to Malta. Do try to be cheerful. There's a good soul. Sidney will tell you plenty to make you laugh when he comes home. If he ever does come home," sighed the old woman. "What do you mean by that?" "Oh, it's all very well asking questions as can't be answered now, m'lady, but I be all the mubble fubble that I be." "What is a mubble fubble?" asked Hope, staring. "It's a queer like feeling of death and sorrow and tears of blood and not lifting your head for groans," said Widow Anne incoherently. "And there's meanings in mubble fubble as were told in Scripture, not by what the professor's been kind of a gentleman to Sid in taking him from going round with the laundry cart and educating him to watch camphorated corpses, not as what I'd like to keep my eye on them for things myself, but there's no more watching for my boy Sid as I dreamed." "What did you dream?" asked Lucy curiously. Widow Anne threw up 2 gnarled hands, wrinkled with age and laundry work, screwing up her face meanwhile. "I dreamed of a battle and a murder and sudden death, my lady, with Sid in a cold grave playing on a harp, angel-like, yes." She folded her rusty shawl round her spare form and nodded. "There was Sid, looking beautiful in his coffin, and cut into his harsh, as you might say, with— Ah, shuddered Lucy, with Archie strove to draw her away, "with murder written all over his poor face," pursued the widow, "and I woke up screeching, with a cramp in my legs, and pains in my lungs, and beatings in my heart, and stiffness in my—" "Oh, hang it up! Shut up!" shouted Archie, seeing that the woman was growing pale and ghoulish in her recital. "Don't be a fool, woman. Professor Braddock says that Bolton'll be back in 3 days, and the mummy'll be here as it was sent to be fetched from Malta. You have been having a nightmare. Don't you see how you are frightening Miss Kendall?" "The Witch of Endor, sir." "Deuce take the Witch of Endor, and you also. There's a shilling. Go and drink yourself into a more cheery frame of mind." Widow Anne bit the shilling with one of her 2 remaining teeth and dropped a curtsy. "You're a good kind gentleman," she smirked, cheered at the kind of unlimited gin. "And when my boy Sid do come home a corpse, I hope you'll come to the funeral, sir." What a raven, said Lucy. A widow Anne toddled away in the direction of one of the public houses in Gartley village. I don't wonder that the late Mr. Bolton laid her out with a flat iron. To slay such a woman would be meritorious. I wonder how she came to be the mother of Sidney, said Miss Kendall reflectively, as they resumed their walk. He's such a clever, smart, and handsome young man. I think Bolton owes everything to the professor. Teaching and example, Lucy, replied her lover. He was an uncouth lad, I understand, when your stepfather took him into the house 6 years ago. Now he's quite presentable. I shouldn't wonder if he's married Mrs. Jarcher. I rather think Mrs. Jarcher admires the professor. Oh, he'll never marry. He'll never marry her. If she were a mummy, there might be a chance, of course. But as a human being, the professor will never look at her. I don't think so much as that, Archie. Mrs. Jasper is attractive. Hope laughed. In a mutton dressed as a lamb way, no doubt. And she has money. My father is poor, and so you make up a match at once, as every woman will do. Well, let us get back to the pyramids, and we'll see how the flirtation is progressing. Lucy walked for a few more steps in silence. Do you believe in Mrs. Bolton's dream, Archie? No. I believe she eats heavy suppers. Bolton will return quite safe. He is a clever fellow, not easily taken advantage of. Don't bother any more about Widow Anne and her dismal prophecies. I will try not to, replied Lucy dutifully. All the same, I wish she had not told me of her dream. And she shivered. Chapter 2, Professor Braddock. There was only one really palatial mansion in Gartley, and that was the ancient Georgian house known as the Pyramids. Lucy's stepfather had given the place this eccentric name on taking up his abode there some 10 years previously. Before that time, the dwelling had been occupied by the lord of the manor and his family, but now the old squire was dead, and his impecunious children were scattered to the four corners of the globe in search of money with which to rebuild their ruined fortunes. As the village was somewhat isolated and rather unhealthy, situated in a marshy country, the huge, roomy old grange had not been easy to let, and had proved quite impossible to sell. Under these disastrous circumstances, Professor Braddock, who described himself humorously as a scientific pauper, had obtained the tenancy at a ridiculously low rent, much to his satisfaction. Many people would have paid to avoid exile in these damp wastelands, which, as it were, fringed civilization. But their loneliness and desolation suited the professor exactly. He required ample room for his Egyptian collection, with plenty of time to decipher hieroglyphics and study perished dynasties of the Nile River. The world of the present day did not interest Braddock in the least. He lived almost continuously on the portion of the mental plane which had to do with the far distant past. The only concern for him with the physical existence, when it consisted of mummies and mystic beetles, sepulchral ornaments and pictured documents, hawk-headed deities, and such like, things of almost inconceivable in antiquity. He rarely walked abroad and was invariably late for meals, save when he missed any particular one altogether, which happened frequently. Absent-minded in conversation, untidy in dress, unpractical in business, dreamy in manner, Professor Braddock lived solely for archaeology. That such a man should have taken himself a wife was a mystery. Yet he had been married 15 years before to a widow who had possessed a limited income and one small child. It was the opportunity of securing this use of steady income which had decoyed Braddock into the matrimonial snare of Mrs. Kendall. To put it plainly, he had married the agreeable widow for her money. Although he could scarcely be called a fortune hunter, like Eugene Aram, he desired cash to assist learning, and as to that scholar had committed murder to secure what he wanted, so did Professor marry to obtain his ends. These were to have someone manage the house and to be set free from the necessity of earning his bread, so that he might indulge in pursuits more pleasurable than money making. Mrs. Kendall was a placid, phlegmatic lady who liked rather than loved the professor, and whom desired him more as a companion than as a husband. With Braddock, she did not arrange a romantic marriage so much as enter into a congenial partnership. She wanted a man in the house, and desired freedom from the pecuniary embarrassment. On these lines, the prosaic bargain was struck, and Mrs. Kendall became the professor's wife with entirely successful results. She gave her husband a home, and her child a father, who became fond of Lucy, and who, considering he was merely an amateur parent, acted admirably. But this sensible partnership lasted only 5 years. Mrs. Braddock died of the chill on the liver and left her 500 a year to the professor for life, with the remainder to Lucy, then a small girl of 10. It was at this critical moment that Braddock became a practical man for the first time and the last time in his dreamy life. He buried his wife with unfeigned regret, for he had been sincerely attached to her in his absent-minded way, and sent Lucy to Hampstead boarding school. After an interview with his late wife's lawyer to see that the income was safe, he sought for a house in the country, and quickly discovered Gartley Grange, which no one would take because of its isolation. Within 3 months from the burial of Mrs. Braddock, the widower had removed himself and his collection from Gartley, and had renamed the new abode the Pyramids. Here he dwelt quietly and enjoyably from his dry and dust point of view for 10 years, and here Lucy Kendall had come when her education was completed. The arrival of a marriageable young lady made no difference in the professor's habits, and he hailed her thankfully as the successor to her mother in managing the small establishment. It is to be feared that Braddock was somewhat selfish in his views, but the fixed idea of archaeological research made him egotistical. The mansion was 3 stories, flat-roofed, extremely ugly, and unexpectedly comfortable. Built of mellow red brick and dingy white stone facings, it stood a few yards back from the roadway, which ran from Gartley Fort through the village and at the precise point where the Pyramids was situated, curved abruptly through the woodlands to terminate a mile away. At Jessam, the local station of the Thames River Railway, an iron railing embedded in molding stonework divided the narrow front garden from the road, and on either side of the road, or I should say on either side of the door, which could be reached by 5 shallow steps, grew 2 small yew trees, smartly clipped and trimmed into cones of dull green. These yews possessed some magical significance, which Professor Braddock would occasionally explain to chance visitors interested in occult matters. For amongst other things, Egyptians and archaeologists searched into the magic of the sons of Cain and insisted that there was more truth than superstition in their enhancements. Braddock used all the vast rooms of the ground floor to house his collection of antiquities, which he had acquired through many laborious years. He dwelt entirely in his museum, as his bedroom adjoined the study, and he frequently devoured his hurried meals amongst the brilliantly tinted mummy cases. The embalmed dead populated his world, and only now and then, when Lucy insisted, did he ascend to the first floor, which was her particular abode. Here was the drawing room, the dining room, and Lucy's boudoir. Here also were sundry bedrooms, furnished and unfurnished. In one, which Miss Kindle slept, while others remained vacant for chance visitors, principally from the scientific world. The third story was devoted to the cook, her husband, who acted as gardener, and to the house parlor maid, a composite domestic who worked from morning until night in keeping the great house clean. During the day, these servants attended to their business in a comfortable basement, where they cooked, where the cook ruled supreme. And at the back of the mansion stretched a fairly large kitchen garden, to which the cook to which the cook's husband devoured his attention. This was the entire domain belonging to the tenant, as of course the professor did not rent the arable acres and comfortable farms which had belonged to the disposed family. Everything in the house went smoothly, as Lucy was a methodical young person who went by the clock and the almanac. Braddock little knew how much of his undeniable comfort he owed to her focusing on care, for prior to her return from school he had been robbed right and left by unscrupulous domestics. When his stepdaughter arrived, he simply handed over the keys and the housekeeping money and a fixed sum and gave her strict instructions not to bother him. Miss Kindle faithfully observed the injunction, as she enjoyed being undisputed mistress and knew that so long as her stepfather had his meals in bed and his bath in his clothes, he required nothing save the constant society of beloved mummies, of which no one visited, and no one wished to deprive him. These dusted and cleansed and rearranged himself. Not even Lucy dared to invade the museum, and there were mention of spring cleaning, which drove the professor into a disarraying frantic rage, in which he used bad language. On returning from her walk with Archie, the girl had lured her stepfather into assuming a rusty dress suit, which had done service for many years, and had coaxed him into a promise to be present at dinner. Mrs. Dasher, the lively widow of the district, was coming, and Braddock approved of a woman who looked up to him as the one wise man in the world. Even science is susceptible to judicious flattery, and Mrs. Jasher was never backward in putting her admiration into words. Female gossip declared that the widow wished to become the second Mrs. Braddock, but if this was really the case, she had but a small chance of gaining her end. The professor had once sacrificed his liberty to secure a competence, and having acquired 500 a year, was not inclined for a second matrimonial venture. Had the widow been a dollar heiress with $1 million at her back, he would not have troubled to place a ring on her finger. And certainly Mrs. Jasser had little to gain from such a dreary marriage beyond a collection of rubbish and, as she said, and a dull country house situated in a district inhabited solely by peasants belonging to Saxon times. Archie, that is Archie Hope, left Lucy at the door of the pyramids and repaired to his village lodgings. For the purpose was assuming an evening dress. Lucy, being her own housekeeper, assisted the overworked parlor maid to lay and decorate the table before receiving guests. Thus Mrs. Jasser found no one in the drawing room to welcome her, and taking the privilege of old friendship, descended to Beard Braddock's den. The professor raised his eyes from a narrowly bought scarabaeus to behold a stout little lady smiling on him from a doorway. He did not appear to be grateful for the interruption, but Mrs. Jasser was not at all dismayed, being a manhunter by profession. Besides, she saw that Braddock was in the clouds as usual, and would rather have received the king himself in the same absent-minded manner. Poof! What an abominable smell! Exclaimed the widow, holding a flimsy lace handkerchief over her nose. Kind of a camphor sandalwood charnel house smell. I wonder you are not asphyxiated. Poof! Ah! Brr! The professor stared at her with cold, fishy eyes. Did you speak? Oh dear, me? Yes. And you don't even have to ask me to take a chair. If I were a nasty, stuffy mummy now, you would be embracing me this time. Don't you know that I have come to dinner, you silly man? And she trapped him patiently with her closed fan. No, you have not, Mrs. Jasser spoke positively and pointed to a small tray of untouched food on the side of the table. You have not even had luncheon. You must not live on air, like a chameleon, or on love, perhaps. She ended up in a significantly tender tone, but she might as well have spoken in the granite image of Horace in the corner. Braddock merely rubbed his chin and stared harder than he had ever at the glittering visitor. Dear me, said he innocently, I must have forgotten to eat. Lamplight, he looked around vaguely. Of course, I remember lighting the lamps. Time has gone by very quickly, and I am rapidly getting hungrier and hungrier. He paused to make sure, then repeated his remark in a more positive manner. Yes, I am very hungry. Mrs. Jasser, he looked at her as though she had just entered. Of course, Mrs. Jasser, do you wish to be seen about with me or anything in particular? The widow frowned at this inattention and then laughed. It was impossible to be angry at this dreamer. I have come to dinner, Professor. Do try and wake up. You are half asleep, half starved too, I expect. Uncomfortably or unaccountably. Unaccountably. When you have eaten nothing since breakfast, you are a weird man. Believe you are a mummy yourself. But the professor had again returned to examine the scarabus, this time with a powerful magnifying glass. It is certainly belongings to the 20th dynasty, he murmured, wrinkling his brow. Mrs. Jasser stamped and flirted with her fan pettishly. The creature's soul, she had decided, was certainly not in his body, and until it came back, he would continue to ignore her, with annoyance of a woman who is not getting her own way. She leaned back in Braddock's one comfortable chair, which she had unerringly selected, and examined him intently. Perhaps the Gallops were correct. The Gallops? I mean the gossips. The gossips. Perhaps they were correct. And she was trying to imagine what kind of husband he would make. But whatever might be her thoughts, she eyed Braddock as earnestly as Braddock eyed the scarabus. Outwardly, the professor did not appear like the savant he was reported to be. He was small of stature, plump of body, rosy of little cupid cheeks, and extraordinarily youthful, considering his 50-odd years of scientific wear and tear. With a smooth, clean-shaven face, plentiful white hair, and spun silk, the neat feet and hands, he did not look his age. The dreamy look on his small blue eyes was rather bellied by the heartiness of the thin-lipped mouth and by the pugnacious push of his jaw. The eyes and the dome-like forehead hinted that the brain, without much originality, but the lower part of this contradictory countenance might have belonged to a prize fighter. Nevertheless, Braddock's plumpness did away with a considerable extent of his aggressive look. It was always certainly latent, but only came to the surface when he fought with his brother, Savant, over some tomb dweller from Thebes. In the soft lamplight, he looked like a fighting cherub, and it was in pity and in the interests of art that the hairless, pink, white face did not surmount a pair of wings rather than a rusty fitting dress suit. He's named as Daphne in the looks, thought Mrs. Jasper, who was Scotch, although she claimed to be cosmopolitan. With his mummies, he was all right, but outside these, he might be a difficult man to manage. And these things, she glanced around the shadowy room, crowded with dead and their earthly belongings. I would carry I don't think I would care to marry the British Museum. Too much like hard work. And I'm not so young as I was. The near mirror, polished silver one, which had belonged ages ago to some coquette in Memphis, denied this uncomplimentary look. For Mrs. Jasper did not look a day over 30, although her birth certificate set her down as 45. In the lamplight, she might have passed for even younger. So carefully had she preserved what remained of her youth, she assuredly was somewhat stout, and never had been so tall as she desired to be. But the lines of her plump figure were still discernible in that cunningly cut gown, and she carried her little self with such mighty dignity that people overlooked the mortifying height of the trifle over 5 feet. Her features were small and neat, but her large blue eyes were so noticeable and melting that those eyes whom she turned on them were ignored and lacked of boldness in the chin and the nose. Her hair was brown and arranged in the latest fashion, while her complexion was so fresh and pink that if she did paint a jealous woman averred she must have been quite an artist with the hare's foot and the rouge pot and the necessary powder puff. Mrs. Jasper's clothes repaid the thought she expended upon them, and she was artistic in this as other things. Dressed in a crocus yellow gown, with short sleeves to reveal her beautiful arms and cut low to display her splendid bust, she looked perfectly dressed. A woman would have declared the wide netted black lace with which the dress was draped to be cheap, and black lace was never cheap. But it would have hinted that the widow wore too many jewels in her hair, on her corsage, around her arms, and ridiculously gaudy rings on her fingers. She might have been true, for Mrs. Jasper sparkled like the Milky Way in every movement. But the gleam of gold and flash of gems seemed to suit her opulent beauty. Her slightest movement wafted around in her strange Chinese perfume, which she obtained, so she said, from a friend of her late husband's, who was in the British Embassy at Pekin. No one possessed this especial perfume but Mrs. Jasper, and anyone who had previously met her in the darkness, could have guessed at her identity. With a smile to show her white teeth and her golden dress and glittering jewels, the pretty widow glowed in that glimmering room like a tropical bird. The professor raised his dreamy eyes and laid the beetle on the side. Then his brain fully grasped that this charming vision was waiting to be entertained. She was better looking upon even than the beloved Scarabaeus, and he advanced to shake hands as though she had just entered the room. Mrs. Jasper, knowing his ways, rose to extend her hand, and two small, stout figures looked absurdly like a pair of chubby Dresden ornaments which had stepped from the mantel shelf. "Dear lady, I am glad to see you. You have. The professor reflected, and then came back with a rush to the present century. "You have come to dinner, if I mistake not." "Lucy asked me a week ago," she replied tartly, for no woman likes to be neglected for a mere beetle, however ancient. "Then you will certainly get a good dinner," said Braddock, waving his plump white hands. "Lucy is an excellent housekeeper. I have no fault to find with her, no fault at all. But she is obstinate. Oh, very obstinate, as her mother was. Do you know, dear lady, that in a papyrus roll, which I already acquired, I found the recipe for a genuine Egyptian dish, which Armintha, the last pharaoh of the 11th dynasty, you know, might have eaten, and probably did eat. I desired Lucy to serve it to you tonight, but she refused, much to my annoyance. The ingredients, which had to do with roasted gazelle, were oil, coriander, and seed, if my memory serves me, astophidia. Ah! Mrs. Jasper's handkerchief went again to her mouth. "Say no more, Professor. Your dish sounds horrid. I don't wish to eat it and be turned into a mummy before my time." "You would make a really beautiful mummy," said Braddock, paying what he conceived was a compliment. "And should you die, I shall certainly attend to your embalming, if you prefer that to cremation." "You dreadful man!" cried the widow, turning pale and shrinking. "Why, I really believe that you would like to see me packed away in one of those disgusting coffins." "Disgusting!" cried the outraged professor, striking one of the brilliantly tinted cases. "Can you call so beautiful a specimen of sepulchral art disgusting? Look at the colors, at the regularity of the hieroglyphs. Why, the history of the dead is set out in this magnificent series of pictures." He adjusted the prunelles and began to read. "The Osirian Sephiromorpheus, that is a female name, Mrs. Jasper, who—" "I don't want to have my history written on my coffin," interrupted the widow hysterically, for this funeral talk frightened her. It would take much more space than a mummy case which to write it. My life has been volcanic, I can tell you. By the way," she added hurriedly, seeing that Braddock was on the eve of resuming the reading, "tell me about your Inca mummy. Has it arrived?" The professor immediately followed the false trail. "Not yet," he said briskly, rubbing his smooth hands, "but in 3 days I shall expect the driver will be at the pier side, and Sidney will bring the mummy on here. I shall unpack it at once and learn exactly how the ancient Peruvians embalmed their dead. Doubtless they will have learned the art from—" "The Egyptians?" ventured Mrs. Jasper rashly. Braddock glared. "Nothing of the sort, dear lady." He snorted angrily. "Absurd, ridiculous. I am inclined to believe that Egypt was merely a colony of a vast island of Atlantis, mentioned by Plato. There is my theory, and I hope it is correct. That is where civilization would have begun. And the kings of Atlantis, doubtless the gods of historical tribes, governed the whole world, including that portion which we now term South America." "Do you mean to say that there were Yankees in those days?" inquired Mrs. Jasper frivolously. The professor tucked his hands in his shabby coat-tails and strode up and down the room, warming his rage, which was provoked by such ignorance. "Good heavens, madam, where have you lived?" he exclaimed explosively. "Are you a fool or merely an ignorant woman? I am talking of prehistoric times, thousands of years ago, when you were probably a stray atom embedded in the slime. Oh, you are horrified? A horrifying creature?" cried Mrs. Jasper indignantly, and was about to give Braddock her opinion, if only to show him that she could hold her own when the door opened. "How are you, Mrs. Jasper?" said Lucy, advancing. Here I am, Archie. Dinner is ready, and you." "I am very hungry," said Mrs. Jasper. "I have been called an atom of the slime." Then she laughed and took possession of young Hope. Lucy wrinkled her eyebrows and motioned that she did not approve of the widow's man-annexing instinct. Okay, my friends, that is the first 2 chapters in this new book of ours, The Green Mummy. Yes, The Green Mummy. And so we shall continue with this when we return. Oh, and by the way, if I didn't say before, The Green Mummy was written by Fergus Hume. Okay? So there you have it. The Green Mummy by Fergus Hume, chapters 1 and 2 complete. We will continue with this for chapter 3 tomorrow. This has been Indiana Homes. Love to you all, and have a good evening.
Please hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notifications button. Thank you very much.